I think it'd be fair to say I'm most known for my 6x17 work. It's a unique format. I've discovered it several years ago and fell in love with it pretty quick. But when I was getting into it, there weren't a ton of resources online about 6x17 because there's just not that many people shooting it. And so I wanted to throw together these videos giving you kind of a primer on 6x17 photography. So this is probably going to be 3 videos talking about the basics of 6x17 photography, as well as equipment, lens recommendations, and also composing in panoramic format. But I want to start with the most basic of basics, the negative itself. So 6x17 photography is done on 120 film or 220 film, but because it's the future and the future sucks, no 220 film, just 120. So it's done on medium format film. And like all medium formats, it starts with a 6. 6x6, 6x7, 6x9, 645, which is short for 6x4.5. 6x17 is no different. And that's because medium format film measures, well, just over 6 centimeters. It's actually 6.1 centimeters edge to edge, and that's where we get the 6 on all of our medium formats. And the width of a 6x17 negative is, you guessed it, 17 centimeters. So that's where we get our 6x17. Now, of course, the camera is going to end up putting a border on the negative. You don't use it all the way edge to edge. So if we include the border, we're getting 5.5 centimeters by 17 centimeters. That's the actual image area. And that could vary a little bit camera to camera, but generally it's going to be 5.5 centimeters tall by 17 centimeters wide. Now, if we were to use the entire image area of that negative, no cropping at all, of course cropping out the border, but not cropping the image, this would give us an aspect ratio of 1 to 3.09. which is a weird aspect ratio. So I opt for cropping out the left and right sides of my image just a little bit to give me a nice clean aspect ratio of 1 to 3. Although there is no like industry standard aspect ratio for panoramics, I would say 1 to 3 is probably your best bet on 6x17. And what I like about the 1:3 aspect ratio is it gives me good, clean, round numbers when I go to print. So for instance, whether I want to print this negative 1 foot wide, 2 foot wide, 3 foot, 4 foot, 5 foot, or 6 foot, the vertical dimension is always going to be a good, clean number. So if I'm printing it 1 foot wide, I'm going to have a 4x12. 2 foot wide, I'm going to have an 8x24. Then 12x36, 16x48, 20x60, and 24x72. So it gives me good, clean numbers. Now, if we do that 1:3 aspect ratio and we maximize the image, we're really not cropping any more of the image than necessary, then the actual usable negative area is going to be 54 millimeters tall by 162 millimeters wide. So that's the actual usable image area at a 1:3 aspect ratio. And I know what you're thinking. What is this? Communist Russia? Millimeters? Huh? Don't worry, I got you, patriots. That comes out to 2 1/8 inch tall by 6 3/8 inch wide. And I'm going to be sticking to inches from here on out because we're going to be talking a lot about prints and pixels per inch. And also, I'm an ugly American. So that's the usable image area of our negative. 2 1/8 inch tall by 6 3/8 inch wide. So it's a big ass negative. And that is a reason to shoot 6x17. It's not my primary reason to shoot 6x17, but it is kind of nice. You're getting a lot of the benefits of large format photography without dealing with large format sheet film. You still get to use nice, convenient, readily available, and cheaper medium format film. So that's all well and good. We got a big ass negative. Obviously that's going to equate to a lot more resolution than say 35 millimeter, but how much resolution are we really going to get? You know, if you go to scan this negative at home or at a lab, how big is that file really going to be? So let's take a look. So I'm going to look at scanning at several different resolutions here, starting with 2400 pixels per inch, which is readily available on even the most basic home film scanner. My Epson Perfection V750 can easily do 2400 pixels per inch. And just for anyone who's unfamiliar with what I'm talking about here, 2400 pixels per inch scan means that the scanner is converting every inch of the negative into 2400 pixels on the computer. And depending on the scanner, depending on your settings, you can change how many pixels are coming out of each inch of the negative. So that's where PPI comes from. So 2400 pixels per inch. We'll look at 3200 pixels per inch as well, because the Epson Perfection scanners are very much capable of 3200 pixels per inch. In fact, that's what I usually scan at when I'm doing my high resolution scans for printing. And then there's 4800 pixels per inch. The Epson is capable of that. You can set it to 4800 pixels per inch, but there's plenty of resources online telling you that you really never want to go above 3200 pixels per inch on the Epson Perfection scanner, because that's the ideal optical resolution, even though the scanner tells you that it can go all the way up to 6400 pixels per inch optical resolution. But let's not go down that rabbit hole. 4800 pixels per inch is easily attainable with a drum scan, so you can get 4800 pixels per inch if you really need to. But we're going to look at each of these scan resolutions, and we'll see how big of a file that actually gives us in terms of pixels. We're going to look at how that translates to megapixels, and then what print size that would yield, assuming you're printing at 300 pixels per inch, because 300 ppi is the standard resolution for high quality printing. So at 2400 pixels per inch, if we scan our 6x17 negative, we're going to get a digital file measuring 5100 pixels tall by 15,300 pixels wide. That's quite a few pixels. You multiply those two numbers, you get your megapixels. It comes out to 78 megapixels. Now in this modern age of Sony Alpha A39 Mark 7s, 78 megapixels is not outrageous, but the fact that you can get 78 megapixels from a measly 2400 ppi scan tells you that you're dealing with a pretty damn big negative. Now the print size from this file, assuming you're not blowing it up at all, is 17 inches by 51 inches. So that's over 4 foot wide. 51 inches right there. That's a huge print for a 2400 ppi scan. So in other words, you're not blowing up the negative all that big to get a print that large. And that's the nice thing about using such a large negative, is you're really not pushing it that hard when you're getting something 51 inches wide. Now how about 3200 ppi? Well, that will give us a file measuring 6800 pixels tall by 20,400 pixels wide. Multiply those two numbers, you get 138.7 megapixels. And if we print that at 300 ppi, we get 22.7 inches tall by 68 inches wide. So that's almost 6 foot wide. 68 inches. Which also happens to be pretty much my wingspan, in case you guys were taking bets. So huge prints are readily attainable. But let's say we take our 6x17 negative and we send it off to a drum scanner. Drum scanners are capable of well beyond 4800 ppi, by the way. But just for ease of numbers, let's say 4800 ppi, we're going to get a file measuring 10,200 pixels tall by 30,600 pixels wide. Multiply those two numbers, we get an eye-watering 312.1 megapixels. Sure, your computer's going to be sparking and smoking, but you got a lot of image to work with. And printing that at 300 ppi, we get 34 inches tall by 102 inches wide. That's almost 9 foot wide. So you get a lot of resolution from a 6x17 negative compared to smaller film formats. But what use is 312.1 megapixels if all your images are just ending up on the Instabooks? You only need maybe like, I don't know, 3 megapixels for that. So this really only matters if we're going to print. So let's talk about when you get your prints made, how much are we blowing up the negative really at different sizes? Now it can be kind of difficult to understand what a 2x blow up really means or what a 4x blow up really means. How much is that really pushing the negative? It's much easier to understand this stuff if we compare it to something we're all kind of already familiar with. And pretty much everyone is already familiar with 35mm film. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to tell you that if I blow up my 6x17 negative to this size, That's the same as blowing up a 35mm negative to this size. Then you can get an idea of how much we're really pushing the negative when we blow up to different sizes. Let's start with just 4x12. So you want to get a 1 foot wide print from your 6x17 negative. That's this big here. Now, maybe that's too small to hang on the wall, but think about how that translates to books and zines. If you're going to put together a book, it's unlikely you're really going to print bigger than 12 inches wide, unless you're doing a 2-page spread. You might go a little bigger than that. But most books and zines, the 6x17 negative is going to be blown up probably even smaller than that. So taking your 6x17 negative up to 4x12, that's less than a 2x blow up. You're not even doubling the negative. So that's the same as blowing up a 35mm to less than 2 inches by 3 inches. So taking this little piece of film up to about that wide is the same as taking this negative up to 12 inches. So plenty of resolution to work with. How about an 8x24? We want to get a 2 foot wide print. Well, that's the same as blowing up 35mm to smaller than 4x6 because that's less than a 4x blow up. So when you take your roll of 35mm to the lab and you check off the box for 4x6 inch prints, always, Matt, make sure you get dupes because you need some for the photo album and some to flip through. That's no sweat for 35mm film. We've all seen 4x6 inch prints and they look great. There's no image degradation, there's no lack of resolution because you're blowing up the negative. A 4x blow up is really no big deal. So that's the same as taking this up to 24 inches wide. How about 3 feet wide, 12 inches by 36? And I actually happen to have a couple of 12 by 36 inch prints back here, so you can see exactly how big they are. So that's 12 by 36. That's a good size print. Certainly worthy of hanging on the wall, I'd say. And a 12 by 36 inch print from a 6x17 negative is the same as blowing up 35mm to smaller than 6 by 8 inches. And I actually cut out a piece of paper to show you exactly how big that is. That's really not that difficult for 35mm. That's not that big of a print. So getting my full 3 foot wide print here from 6x17 is no sweat for a negative of that size. Now 16 by 48, that's about a 7.5x blow up. That's like blowing up a 35mm to smaller than 8x10. And I know 8x10 is not the standard aspect ratio for 2x3, but we're trying to keep the numbers relatable here. And then finally 24 by 72, this big old beast back here. That's like taking 35mm up to smaller than 11 by 17. So we get it, Nick. The 6x17 negative has a lot of resolution. There's a lot to work with there. And if you like big prints, it's a good format for that. But how about just working with 6x17? You know, what are some of the pros and cons of working with a format like this? And let's look at the bad and the good. We'll start with the bad, because I like to end on a high note. So first off, big-ass cameras. A big-ass negative means big-ass cameras. You can see my 6x17 here is a pretty large camera. That means it's not easy to travel with, and I would say my biggest lament with 6x17 photography, as much as I love it for all of its other good qualities, is I really have only ever shot 6x17 in areas that I can drive to. Air travel with this camera is a pain in the ass, so I don't know that I'm ever gonna like photograph Hawaii on 6x17. Now don't get me wrong, it's totally possible. You get the right luggage and stuff, you can travel with it, but it's definitely much more difficult, and I tend to just drive to places where I can take this big hefty camera. And big negatives with big cameras mean you're dealing with higher reproduction ratios. And reproduction ratios just refer to how big the subject is being reproduced behind the lens. So how big it is on the negative. And so the bigger the negative gets, generally the bigger your reproduction ratios get. And the bigger the reproduction ratios get, you get two problems. First off, you have to be much more careful with focus because depth of field shrinks at higher reproduction ratios. It's also, of course, more difficult to get the full depth of field you want, if that's the case. But also, you can't really shoot handheld when you're dealing with massive reproduction ratios because the tiniest vibration shows up in the image much more than on a smaller reproduction ratio format. So you're going to need a tripod. Another downside, it uses large format lenses. And the only reason I'm putting that in the bad column is if you've never used large format lenses before, it's a new thing to learn, it might be a new thing to buy, and they can be a little intimidating. But if you want to get past that intimidation, I've got an online course for you. You know I do. Large format photography if you want to learn all about lenses and everything else large format. The bigger issue with 6x17 is that it's expensive. Never mind the cameras. I mean, if you want to have like a little mini heart attack today, just go on eBay, look up the Fuji GX617, which is a really well-known 6x17 camera, and check out the prices on those bad boys. But it's more, once you have the camera, the shooting is expensive. Because let's break down the cost. You know, if you get a roll of 120 film, let's say it's Kodak Portra 160. Portra 160, by the way, is cheaper than Portra 400, and you're only losing 1 1/3 stop of speed. And if you're going to be on a tripod anyway, might as well go cheaper. But that's going to run you about 12 bucks. Developing, let's just say it's $5, not including any scanning, because of course you're going to scan it yourself. That's $17. And 6x17 on 120 film, you get 4 negatives. That's it. So $17 across 4 negatives, that's $4.25 per image. So you better nail your metering, you better nail your focus, and you better nail your composition. The other problem with 6x17, it's not great for digital sharing and books. This is another one of my constant laments with 6x17. I shoot this beautiful big negative, and then I put it on Instagram, and it's about that big. So one way I've gotten around that is first I post it small with the white border around it, but then I take the digital file and I crop it to its 3 square parts, because remember it's a 1:3 aspect ratio. Then you can swipe through and see the whole image. Or if you just go to my website, you can go into landscape mode and actually see it how it's supposed to be seen. But whatever the case, it's always kind of a shame shooting such a nice, big, beautiful negative, and very few people get to see it that large. As for printing, like in books, this is something I've been grappling with because I really want to do a book sometime within the next few years, and I do a lot of 6x17. So I'm toying with doing like a really wide format book so that I can have the entire image on one page. I don't really like to spread it across 2 pages because then the middle of the image gets lost in the crease. And a lot of my panoramic photography, the center of the image is actually the most important part, so I don't want to lose it in the crease. So that's something I'm going to have to figure out later. The other bad, scanning. With a negative this wide, a lot of scanners can't handle it, even dedicated film scanners. So like a Nikon Cool Scan, most of them, they can't do 6x17. Like the widest they can do is 6x9 or something like that. So that can be a problem. If you're scanning with your digital camera, which by the way is a super sharp way to scan, and I know I've ragged on it in previous videos, but I'm always just teasing you, man. Scanning with your digital camera is a great way to do it. But with 6x17, what I ran into is the only way you're going to get enough resolution out of this wide negative scanning with your digital camera is if you stitch multiple images from your digital camera. And I found that stitching, no matter how flat I got the negative, no matter how careful I leveled my camera and made it all perfect, the stitching was just always a nightmare. It never lined up perfect. I have a video on that if you want to check it out, about how much it was a nightmare. But that can be a problem. And then also if you get 6x17 scanned at a lab, I'm not sure every lab would be able to scan 6x17. I could be wrong, but I think a lot of the commercial production scanners are not really designed for a format this wide. That's one of the reasons I use my Epson Perfection B750, is it can handle really any format. 6x17 is no problem. It's no more difficult than 6x6 or even 4x5. So scanning might be a bit of an obstacle. But let's not be so negative. Let's talk about the good. It uses roll film. That's great. You don't have to deal with sheet film. There's some benefits that come with that. First off, it is cheaper than sheet film. It's also more readily available. More local camera stores are likely to have 120 film than sheet film. There's more films available in 120 format, so you can experiment a lot more with different film stocks. But also, just when you're out in the field, if you burn through all your large format film, you're shooting sheet film, you better have a dark film changing bag with you or something, because the only way you can load new sheet film is in complete darkness. But I can burn through rolls of film like crazy when I'm out in the field, and I never have to bring along my film changing bag because it's easy to get in here in broad daylight. Also good, 6x17 uses large format lenses. Who the what the? Well, that's in the bad column. Yes, large format lenses are also great for a lot of reasons. First off, they're actually relatively affordable for how good they are. And large format lenses, they project a nice big image circle on the negative, and then the negative is, by default, it's centered in that image circle. And then so you're actually using the sharpest, best part of the lens because you're really only using the center of this real big image circle. And that's great. So you get high resolution lenses using the best part of that projected image for your 6x17 negative. View cameras are also available. So my 6x17 here is a view camera style of camera, and there's benefits that come with that. You get the capability for rise, fall, shift, tilt, swing, typically on both standards, and that lets you do things like implement the Scheinflug principle, which helps you get the plane of focus better in line with your subject and thus increase the perceived depth of field. You can also do more creative things like reverse Scheinflug, where you get shallow focus, and with rise and fall, you can keep vertical lines vertical. With shift, you can keep horizontal lines perfectly parallel, edge to edge. The point is, view cameras are great. And one of the reasons I've gravitated towards 6x17 so much is I have the option for a view camera. And I really like to implement all those movements in my pictures. Smaller formats, you generally can't do that. So view cameras are available, which is a big deal for me. But probably the number one reason I shoot 6x17 is it's a unique format. And there's a lot of benefits that come with that. First off, it's a good way to separate your work from everyone else's because you're shooting something that no one else is. But I also really just like that it's unique for myself. It challenges me. It challenges my creativity. I start finding compositions in a long, skinny rectangle rather than the standard, 4x5 or 2x3 aspect ratio. And so it's a good way to exercise my brain. It's a good way to find compositions that otherwise wouldn't have worked in different aspect ratios. So having a unique format can be a good way to separate your work from everyone else's, but also just a good way to challenge yourself. And I really like that about 6x17. 6x17 can also contribute to that highly coveted cinematic look. Now, there's not any one thing that constitutes the cinematic look. I'd say the number one thing is lighting, but some other things can contribute to the cinematic look. The focal lengths used, the distance you shoot your subject from, the tonalities, the metering, the lighting, all that stuff. But one thing about 6x17 is its aspect ratio of 1:3 is remarkably close to a cinematic format called Panavision 70. And Panavision 70 is, I'll be honest, not used in a lot of films, but it is only used in high-end Hollywood productions because it's a large format cinematic film and that's very expensive. So they only use it when the film really deserves it. And Panavision 70 has an aspect ratio of 2.76 to 1. So very close to the 3:1 aspect ratio of 6x17. Some notable movies shot on Panavision 70, Ben-Hur, It's a Mad, 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 Mad World. I think I got 4 mads in there. And a personal favorite of mine, The Hateful Eight. So Tarantino chose to shoot that film in Panavision 70, and when you watch it, you just get these beautiful panoramic sweeping vistas of snow-covered mountains, and it's just gorgeous. So shooting in 6x17, one thing I like about it is it can help add that little edge of a cinematic look. And then finally, you might be thinking, well, these are all just benefits of panoramic photography in general, and 6x17 is not the only way to do that. How about swing lens panoramics or stitched panos? So I previously covered a swing lens panoramic camera called the Noblex in another video. And then there's also, of course, stitched panos. You take multiple photos and then stitch them together. Swing lens panos and stitched panos both have the same problem. lot of the same problems actually, which one of them is you're not just getting a straight on view of the subject. You're swinging the camera. So you're looking down that way, you're looking down that way, and you're looking at your subject this way. 6x17 doesn't have that problem. So if you're shooting a building on a street, you're not going to be looking down the street on the left of the photo and down the street on the right of the photo. It's going to look like a normal photo. So it keeps lines where they should be. But also moving subjects. You know, you're dealing with moving waves or traffic, street, car lights streaking in a nighttime exposure. No problem for 6x17. It's no different than any other camera. But if you're dealing with swing lens or stitched photos, that can become a bit of an issue. But also, stitching photos is just a pain in the ass. It's an extra step. You got to level the camera perfectly, because if you don't level the camera, your horizons are going to get bowed one way or the other. And then also, if you're trying to do a stitched pano with film, like let's say you take your RZ67 out and you're trying to do a 3 stitched pano, good luck, my friend. The scans are never gonna match up just perfect. It's easier on digital. Everything's flat and perfect, but on film, there's just too much variation in the waviness of the film, the flatness of the film, all that. So stitching panos, just not the same as shooting in 6x17. All right, now in the next video, I'm gonna talk all about equipment. We're gonna talk about cameras, we're gonna talk about lenses, focal lengths I recommend, filters, when you need them, when you don't, all that kind of stuff. And then after that, we'll talk about composition. So keep an eye out for that. Check back on my channel, I guess. I don't know when that's gonna go out, or if you're a subscriber, I don't know if you get notified. I don't know how YouTube works. But whatever the case, if you found this useful and you wanna help a brother out, you can check the links in the description for ways to support my channel and support my work. So, see you in the next video.